Vincent Willem van Gogh, March 30, 1853 to 29 July 1890, was a Dutch post-impressionist painter who posthumously became one of the most famous and influential figures in Western art history. In a decade, he created about 2,100 artworks, including around 860 oil paintings, most of which date from the last 2 years of his life. They include landscapes, still lives, portraits and self-portraits, and are characterized by bold colors and dramatic, impulsive and expressive brushwork that contributed to the foundations of modern art. Not commercially successful in his career, he struggled with severe depression and poverty, which eventually led to his suicide at age 37. Born into an upper-middle-class family, Van Gogh drew as a child and was serious, quiet, and thoughtful. As a young man, he worked as an art dealer, often traveling, but became depressed after he was transferred to London. He turned to religion and spent time as a Protestant missionary in predominantly Roman Catholic southern Belgium. He drifted in ill health and solitude before taking up painting in 1881, having moved back home with his parents. His younger brother Theo supported him financially. The two kept a long correspondence by letter. His early works, mostly still lives and depictions of peasant laborers, contain few signs of the vivid color that distinguished his later work. In 1886, he moved to Paris, where he met members of the avant-garde, including Émile Bernard and Paul Gauguin, who were reacting against the Impressionist sensibility. As his work developed, he created a new approach to still lives and local landscapes. His paintings grew brighter as he developed a style that became fully realized during his stay in Arles in the south of France in 1888. During this period, he broadened his subject matter to include series of olive trees, wheat fields and sunflowers. Van Gogh suffered from psychotic episodes and delusions, and though he worried about his mental stability, he often neglected his physical health, did not eat properly and drank heavily. His friendship with Gauguin ended after a confrontation with a razor when, in a rage, he severed part of his own left ear. He spent time in psychiatric hospitals, including a period at Saint-Rémy. After he discharged himself and moved to the Auberges Revue in Auvers-sur-Oise near Paris, he came under the care of the homeopathic Dr. Paul Gauchet. His depression persisted, and on July 27, 1890, Van Gogh is believed to have shot himself in the chest with a revolver, dying from his injuries 2 days later. Van Gogh was commercially unsuccessful during his lifetime, and he was considered a madman and a failure. As he became famous only after his suicide, he came to be seen as a misunderstood genius in the public imagination. His reputation grew in the early 20th century as elements of his style came to be incorporated by the Fauve and German expressionists. He attained widespread critical and commercial success over the ensuing decades, and is remembered as an important but tragic painter whose troubled personality typifies the romantic ideal of the tortured artist. Today, Van Gogh's works are among the world's most expensive paintings to have ever sold, and his legacy is honored by a museum in his name, the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, which holds the world's largest collection of his paintings and drawings. On July 27, 1890, aged 37, Van Gogh is believed to have shot himself in the chest with a 7mm Lefauche's pinfire revolver. There were no witnesses and he died 30 hours after the incident. The shooting may have taken place in the wheat field in which he had been painting, or in a local barn. The bullet was deflected by a rib and passed through his chest without doing apparent damage to internal organs, probably stopped by his spine. He was able to walk back to the Auberges Revue, where he was attended to by 2 doctors, but without a surgeon present the bullet could not be removed. The doctors tended to him as well as they could, then left him alone in his room, smoking his pipe. The following morning, Theo rushed to his brother's side, finding him in good spirits. But within hours Vincent's health began to fail, suffering from an untreated infection resulting from the wound. He died in the early hours of July 29. According to Theo, Vincent's last words were, "The sadness will last forever." Van Gogh was buried on July 30, in the municipal cemetery of Auvers-sur-Oise. The funeral was attended by Theo Van Gogh, Andries Bonjour, Charles Laval, Lucien Pissarro, Émile Bernard, Julien Tanguy and Paul Gauchet, among 20 family members, friends, and locals. Theo had been ill, and his health began to decline further after his brother's death. Weak and unable to come to terms with Vincent's absence, he died on January 25, 1891 at Den Dolder and was buried in Utrecht. In 1914, Johanna van Gogh had Theo's body exhumed and moved from Utrecht to be reburied alongside Vincent's at Auvers-sur-Oise. There have been numerous debates as to the nature of Van Gogh's illness and its effect on his work, and many retrospective diagnoses have been proposed. The consensus is that Van Gogh had an episodic condition with periods of normal functioning. Perry was the first to suggest bipolar disorder in 1947, and this has been supported by the psychiatrists Hemphill and Bloomer. Biochemist Wilfred Arnold has countered that the symptoms are more consistent with acute intermittent porphyria, noting that the popular link between bipolar disorder and creativity might be spurious. Temporal lobe epilepsy with bouts of depression has also been suggested. Whatever the diagnosis, his condition was likely worsened by malnutrition, overwork, insomnia and alcohol. The gun Van Gogh was reputed to have used was rediscovered in 1965 and was auctioned, on June 19, 2019, as the most famous weapon in art history. The gun sold for €162,500, £144,000, $182,000, almost 3 times more than expected. After Van Gogh's first exhibitions in the late 1880s, his reputation grew steadily among artists, art critics, dealers, and collectors. In 1887, André-Antoine hung Van Goghs alongside works of Georges Seurat and Paul Signac, at the Théâtre Libre in Paris. Some were acquired by Julien Tanguy. In 1889, his work was described in the journal Le Moderniste Illustre by Albert Aurier as characterized by fire, intensity, sunshine. 10 paintings were shown at the Société des Artistes Indépendants in Brussels in January 1890. French President Marie-Françoise Sadi Carnot was said to have been impressed by Van Gogh's work. After Van Gogh's death, memorial exhibitions were held in Brussels, Paris, The Hague, and Antwerp. His work was shown in several high-profile exhibitions, including 6 works at Les XX. In 1891 there was a retrospective exhibition in Brussels. In 1892, Octave Mirbeau wrote that Van Gogh's suicide was an infinitely sadder loss for art. Even though the populace has not crowded to a magnificent funeral, and poor Vincent van Gogh, whose demise means the extinction of a beautiful flame of genius, has gone to his death as obscure and neglected as he lived. Van Gogh's works are among the world's most expensive paintings. Those sold for over $100 million today's equivalent include Portrait of Dr. Gachet, Portrait of Joseph Roulin and Irises. The Metropolitan Museum of Art acquired a copy of Wheat Field with Cypresses in 1993 for $57 million by using funds donated by publisher, diplomat and philanthropist Walter Annenberg. In 2015, Lolita Alicamp sold for $66.3 million at Sotheby's, New York, exceeding its reserve of $40 million. Minor Planet 4457 Van Gogh is named in his honor. In October 2022, 2 activists protesting the effects of the fossil fuel industry on climate change threw a can of tomato soup on Van Gogh's sunflowers in the National Gallery, London, and then glued their hands to the gallery wall. As the painting was covered by glass, it was not damaged.